There are moments in life when nothing seems to be moving forward, when your efforts feel unseen, your doers feel delayed, and your heart quietly wonders whether anything is actually changing at all. But what you don't realize is that silence is not absence, delay is not rejection, and what feels like stillness to you may actually be a sign that something far greater is being arranged beyond your understanding. Because sometimes when life feels like it is stopping, it is actually being carefully prepared for a breakthrough you are not yet ready to see. There are times in a person's life when things begin to feel different. Not in an obvious dramatic way, but in a quiet, unsettling way that is hard to explain. A person may notice that the same paths they once walked easily now feel blocked. Things that used to happen smoothly now require more effort. Decisions that once seemed simple now feel delayed or complicated. Opportunities that once looked clear begin to fade or shift in unexpected ways. And in that space, the heart begins to question what is actually happening. At first, the natural reaction is confusion. A person thinks maybe they are doing something wrong. Maybe they have lost direction. Maybe they are not good enough. Or maybe everything is simply going against them. The mind starts searching for explanations. It tries to connect dots that may not even belong together. And slowly, without realizing it, a feeling of frustration or disappointment begins to settle inside. But what is not always understood in those moments is that not every blockage is a punishment, and not every delay is a rejection. Life does not always show its meaning immediately. Sometimes what feels like resistance is actually protection. Sometimes what feels like things falling apart is actually things being carefully rearranged in a way that is not yet visible to the person experiencing it. When doors start closing one after another, it can feel discouraging. A person may think that opportunities are disappearing or that their path is becoming more difficult. But in reality, what is happening may not be a removal of opportunities but a redirection away from what is not meant for them. The human mind tends to focus on what is lost, but rarely sees what is being avoided. There are situations that a person desperately wants in the moment, but later in life they may realize that those very situations would have brought them stress, harm, or delay in growth. At that time, what felt like disappointment may actually reveal itself as protection. The problem is that in the moment of uncertainty, a person cannot see the full picture. They only see the current frame of their life, not the entire sequence that is unfolding. And because of that limited view, they often misinterpret what is happening. A closed door feels like rejection, because the next door has not yet been revealed. But what if that closed door is actually preventing them from entering a path that is not suitable for them at that stage of their life? There is also something deeper happening in these experiences, something that is not immediately obvious. When a person faces repeated resistance, it begins to change their internal state. It forces them to slow down, to reflect, to question, and to become more aware of themselves. Without these moments of resistance, many people would continue moving on autopilot, without deeper awareness of their direction or purpose. So what feels like obstruction may also be a form of inner awakening. A person may start noticing that things that once felt important no longer feel the same. Certain goals lose their emotional grip. Certain distractions no longer feel satisfying. Certain environments or habits begin to feel uncomfortable. This is not random. It is as if the heart itself is being adjusted quietly. The person may not fully understand it, but their inner world begins to shift. What once felt like priority begins to fade, and something deeper begins to form beneath the surface. And in that shift, something very important begins to develop. Patience in a different form. Not just waiting, but waiting while still believing that there is meaning in the delay. At first, this kind of patience is difficult, because the mind wants clarity. It wants confirmation. It wants reassurance that things are still on track. But instead of answers, it receives silence. And that silence can feel uncomfortable, even heavy at times. However, silence does not always mean nothing is happening. In fact, some of the most important changes in life happen in silence, where they are not immediately visible. Just because something is not seen does not mean it is not in progress. A person may not see movement in their external situation, but internally they are being shaped, refined, and prepared for something that requires a different version of themselves. There are situations where a person is not yet ready for what they are asking for, even if they feel ready. Readiness is not only about desire or intention. It is also about timing, growth, maturity, and alignment. Sometimes life delays certain outcomes not because they are denied, but because the person receiving them is still being prepared for them. And during that preparation phase, resistance becomes part of the process. It is also important to understand that human perception often mistakes delay as negativity. When something does not happen on time according to expectation, the mind immediately labels it as wrong or unfair. But time is not always experienced the same way in reality as it is in expectation. What feels slow may actually be perfectly timed in a larger perspective that is not visible yet. When a person is in the middle of such a phase, it can feel like everything is uncertain. But uncertainty is not always a sign of danger. Sometimes it is a sign that transformation is taking place. Just like a process where something is being reshaped, there is a moment where it does not resemble what it will eventually become. In that in-between stage, confusion is natural. And yet, in that very confusion, something very important is being built inside the person. They are learning how to let go of control that was never fully theirs. They are learning how to trust even without immediate proof. They are learning how to continue moving forward even when they do not see the full path. These are not small lessons. These are deep internal shifts that shape how a person handles future situations. Over time, something subtle begins to change. The same delays that once felt frustrating begin to feel less overwhelming. The same closed doors no longer shake the heart as strongly. The same uncertainty no longer creates the same level of panic. Not because the situation has changed, but because the person has changed in how they are responding to it. And in that change, a quiet strength begins to grow. A strength that is not dependent on constant external reassurance. A strength that understands that life unfolds in stages. A strength that learns to remain steady even when clarity is not immediately available. This is often how deeper growth happens, not through instant answers, but through gradual understanding built in moments of uncertainty. What once felt like everything going wrong may later be recognized as everything being redirected. And what once felt like delay may later be understood as preparation for something that required a stronger, more patient, and more aware version of the person. There are moments in a person's life when something begins to change inside them, but they cannot fully explain it to anyone else. It is not always a dramatic change. It does not always come with a clear sign or a sudden realization. Instead, it appears quietly, in the way certain things no longer feel the same. Habits that once felt normal begin to feel empty. Distractions that once felt enjoyable begin to feel unnecessary. Conversations, environments, or even routines that once occupied so much of a person's time slowly start losing their grip on the heart. At first, this feeling can be confusing. A person may wonder why they are no longer finding comfort in the same things they used to rely on. They may think something is wrong with them, or that they are simply going through a phase of boredom or emotional imbalance. But often, what is happening is much deeper than that. It is not always a loss of interest. Sometimes it is a shift in the heart's direction. When life begins to prepare a person for something greater, one of the first changes that happens is internal disconnection from things that are not aligned with that next stage. This does not always happen by force. It happens gradually, in a way that feels natural but noticeable. A person starts to feel less attached to distractions that once consumed their attention. Things that once filled their time begin to feel less meaningful. It is as if their inner world is quietly making space for something different, something more aligned with their growth. This experience can feel strange, because people often expect growth to come only through gaining something new. But sometimes growth also comes through letting go of what no longer serves a purpose. And letting go is not always easy to recognize, because it does not always feel like progress in the moment. It can feel like emptiness at first. It can feel like a lack of excitement or motivation. But underneath that surface feeling, something important is happening. The heart begins to detach from things that were keeping it occupied, but not necessarily fulfilled. Many people stay busy for years without realizing that busyness is not the same as purpose. They fill their time with habits, entertainment, or distractions that make the days pass, but do not necessarily bring deeper satisfaction. When that begins to change, it can feel uncomfortable because the mind is not used to that space of emptiness. But that space is not empty in a negative sense. It is a space being prepared. A person may find themselves questioning their routines more often. Things they used to do without thinking now come with hesitation. Certain environments no longer feel as comfortable as they once did. Certain conversations feel less interesting or even draining. Even their own thoughts begin to change direction. Instead of constantly focusing outward, they begin to look inward more often, reflecting on their life, their purpose, and their direction. This shift is not random. It often signals a deeper process of realignment. When a person is being prepared for a different phase in life, their inner preferences begin to change first. Before external changes happen, internal shifts take place. The heart starts to lose attachment to things that would otherwise distract it from what is coming next. It is as if life is slowly clearing space without the person fully realizing it. In the beginning, this can feel like discomfort or restlessness. A person may feel like something is missing, even though they cannot clearly identify what it is. They may try to go back to old habits or distractions, but they no longer feel the same satisfaction from them. This creates a sense of confusion, because the mind remembers what used to bring comfort, but the heart no longer responds in the same way. What many do not realize is that this discomfort is often part of preparation. When a person is about to move into a different stage of life, their attachment to their previous stage naturally begins to weaken. It is not forced separation. It is gradual detachment. And this detachment is necessary, because holding on too tightly to what is familiar can prevent a person from stepping into what is next. There is also a deeper wisdom in how this process unfolds. If a person were suddenly removed from everything familiar, the transition would feel overwhelming. But when the change happens slowly internally first, the person is gently guided into a new way of thinking and feeling. Their heart adjusts before their circumstances change, and that internal adjustment becomes the foundation for whatever comes next. During this phase, reflection becomes more frequent. A person begins to think more deeply about their life. They may start asking questions they did not consider before. Questions about direction, purpose, and meaning begin to appear more often in their thoughts. Even moments of silence feel different. Instead of rushing to fill every quiet space with noise or distraction, they may find themselves sitting with their thoughts more often. This increased awareness is not accidental. It is part of the process of preparation. When the heart becomes less occupied with distractions, it becomes more open to understanding deeper things. And while this can feel unsettling at first, it is actually a sign of internal growth. The mind is being guided away from superficial engagement towards something more meaningful. Another important aspect of this shift is emotional sensitivity. A person may notice that they are more aware of their feelings, more reflective about their choices, and more conscious of what affects their inner peace. Things that once seemed small may now feel more significant. This does not mean they are becoming weaker emotionally. It means they are becoming more aware. Awareness often comes before transformation. Before a person can move into a new stage of life, they first begin to recognize what no longer belongs in their current stage. And that recognition is not always comfortable. It involves noticing patterns, habits, or attachments that are no longer beneficial. But this awareness is necessary because without it, change would not be possible. As this process continues, a quiet sense of distance from the past begins to form. Not necessarily physical distance, but emotional distance. The hold that certain things once had begins to weaken. And in that space, something new begins to develop, even if it is not yet fully visible. It is a form of internal preparation that does not rely on external confirmation. Over time, a person may not fully understand what is coming next, but they begin to sense that something is shifting. They may not have clarity about the outcome, but they can feel that their internal world is no longer the same as before. And this feeling, though sometimes uncomfortable, is often the beginning of transformation. Because when the heart starts to detach from what no longer serves it, it creates room for what is meant to enter next. And even if a person cannot see that next stage clearly, the preparation is already taking place within them in a quiet and gradual way. There are moments in a person's life when something begins to change inside them, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a quiet and almost unnoticeable manner. Life continues as normal on the outside, but within the heart, something deeper starts to shift. A person begins to think differently, feel differently, and even react differently to the same situations they once experienced without much reflection. It is as if the inner world is slowly waking up to things that were always there, but never fully noticed before. At first, this change often feels like confusion. A person may not understand why they are suddenly thinking more about their direction in life, or why they are becoming more aware of their choices and habits. Things that were once done automatically now come with a sense of questioning. The mind begins to pause more often, observing instead of just reacting. And in that pause, awareness starts to grow. This awareness is not always comfortable in the beginning. It brings attention to things that were previously ignored. A person may start noticing patterns in their behavior, or the impact of certain decisions, or the direction their life has been moving without their full attention. And while this realization can feel overwhelming at times, it is also deeply significant because awareness is the first step toward change. When a person becomes more reflective, their relationship with their own life begins to shift. They no longer see experiences only on the surface level. Instead, they start to question deeper meanings behind events. Why certain things happened, why certain situations unfolded the way they did, and what role they themselves played in those moments. This kind of thinking is not accidental. It often appears when a person is being guided toward a more conscious way of living. With this increased reflection, even ordinary moments start to feel different. Silence is no longer just silence. It becomes something that carries thought. Everyday routines are no longer just habits. They become opportunities for observation. A person may find themselves thinking more deeply during quiet moments, even when nothing significant is happening externally. It is as if their internal awareness has expanded and they are now able to see themselves and their life from a slightly different perspective. This process often leads to emotional sensitivity. A person may become more aware of how they feel in certain situations, more conscious of what brings them peace and what disturbs it. They may begin to notice that some environments drain them while others calm them. They may become more selective with their attention, their time, and even their energy. This is not a sudden personality change, but a gradual unfolding of inner clarity. As this clarity develops, the mind starts to question more. Not in a negative or anxious way, but in a searching way. A person begins to ask themselves whether the path they are on truly aligns with who they are becoming. They may reflect on their goals, their habits, and even the relationships in their life. These questions are not signs of confusion alone. They are also signs of growth, because a mind that never questions rarely evolves. During this stage, there is often a feeling of being in between two versions of oneself. The old version still exists in memory and habit, while a new awareness is slowly forming in the present. This can create a sense of internal tension. A person may feel like they are no longer fully the same as before, but not yet fully something new. And in that space, uncertainty becomes a natural companion. However, this uncertainty is not necessarily negative. It is part of a process where understanding is still forming. Just like dawn is not fully night and not yet fully day, this stage of inner reflection exists between two states. It is a transition period where awareness is expanding, but clarity is still developing. One of the most important changes during this time is the way a person begins to relate to their past. Instead of simply remembering events, they start analyzing them. They begin to see lessons in situations they once experienced without much thought. They may realize that certain moments shaped them more than they understood at the time. This retrospective awareness often brings both understanding and emotional depth. As reflection deepens, the mind also becomes more aware of its own patterns. A person may notice how they react to stress, how they handle disappointment, or how they approach uncertainty. Instead of reacting automatically, they begin to observe their reactions. And in that observation, a small but important space is created between thought and response. That space allows for choice, and choice is the foundation of change. This growing awareness can also lead to a sense of emotional honesty. A person may become more willing to acknowledge what they truly feel, rather than suppressing or ignoring it. They may begin to recognize emotions they previously avoided. And although this can be uncomfortable at times, it also brings a sense of authenticity to their inner world. Over time, this process of reflection begins to shape a more conscious way of living. A person no longer moves purely on autopilot. They begin to think before reacting, feel before judging, and observe before concluding. Life does not necessarily become easier, but it becomes more understood from within. And that understanding creates a different kind of strength, one that is rooted in awareness rather than assumption. As this stage continues, the sense of inner growth becomes more noticeable. A person may not be able to point to one specific moment when everything changed, but they can feel that they are no longer the same as before. Their thoughts have deepened, their awareness has expanded, and their inner world has become more active in ways that were not present earlier. And even though this process can feel intense at times, it is often a sign that something meaningful is unfolding within. Because reflection is not just about thinking more, it is about seeing more clearly. And when a person begins to see themselves and their life with greater clarity, they naturally begin to move toward a more intentional way of living. There are moments in life when a person feels as if nothing is moving forward, even though they are trying their best. They make effort, they make plans, they stay hopeful, yet outcomes seem delayed, answers seem unclear, and situations feel like they are stretching longer than expected. In those moments, the heart naturally becomes restless. It begins to question the timing of everything, the purpose behind the delay, and whether anything is actually going to change at all. And slowly, without even realizing it, patience starts to feel like a test that is harder than the situation itself. This stage of life is often misunderstood. Many people assume that delay means something is wrong, or that silence means nothing is happening. But what is not visible to the human eye is not necessarily inactive. Life often works in layers that are not immediately seen. While a person is waiting, something may already be forming in the background. While the mind is questioning, preparation may already be taking place in ways that cannot yet be understood. But because humans naturally rely on visible results, they often struggle with anything that does not give immediate clarity. When patience is stretched, it is not just time that feels longer. Emotions also become heavier. A person begins to feel the weight of uncertainty. They start thinking more than usual, analyzing situations repeatedly, and trying to predict outcomes that are not yet decided. The mind wants reassurance. It wants confirmation that things are still on track. But instead of confirmation, there is often silence. And that silence can feel uncomfortable because it leaves space for doubt to enter. However, what is often not realized is that patience is not meant to break a person. It is meant to build something within them that ease alone cannot build. When everything happens quickly and smoothly, there is little opportunity for reflection. But when delays occur, a person is forced to slow down internally. They begin to notice their thoughts, their reactions, and their emotional responses more clearly. In that awareness, something important begins to form, a deeper sense of inner strength. This inner strength is not always visible from the outside. It does not always look like confidence or certainty. Sometimes it looks like quiet endurance, continuing forward even without full understanding. Sometimes it looks like choosing to trust, even when the mind is unsure. And sometimes it simply looks like not giving up, even when answers are not arriving as expected. During these periods, a person often feels a strong urge to take control of everything. The mind believes that if it thinks enough, plans enough, or worries enough, it can somehow influence the outcome. But the truth is that not everything in life is shaped by mental effort alone. Some things unfold according to timing, alignment, and wisdom that is beyond immediate perception. And when a person tries to mentally force clarity on something that is still developing, they often end up increasing their own emotional burden. This is why patience becomes such an important part of growth. It teaches a person how to exist in uncertainty without falling apart internally. It teaches them how to continue moving forward without needing constant reassurance. And most importantly, it teaches them that not every answer needs to be known immediately. In order for life to continue meaningfully, there is also a hidden transformation that happens during this phase. While a person feels like they are waiting externally, internally they are being reshaped. Their emotional reactions begin to soften over time. Situations that once caused intense frustration begin to feel slightly more manageable. Thoughts that once created panic begin to lose some of their control. It is not that the situation has changed, but the internal response to the situation is slowly changing. This shift is very gradual and often unnoticeable in the moment. But when a person looks back later, they realize that what once felt unbearable no longer carries the same weight. That change did not happen suddenly. It happened through repeated moments of waiting, reflecting, and enduring without giving up. Patience also reveals something very important about a person's inner dependence. When everything is going well, it is easy to feel self-reliant. But when things are delayed, a person begins to recognize that not everything is within their control. This realization can feel uncomfortable at first, but over time, it can also bring a sense of humility and grounding. It reminds a person that effort is important, but outcomes are not entirely in their hands. And in that understanding, something begins to settle within the heart. The constant pressure to control every detail starts to reduce. The need to mentally predict every outcome becomes less dominant. And instead, a quieter form of trust begins to develop, a trust that things are unfolding in their own time, even if that time is not immediately visible. It is also important to understand that delays are not always empty spaces. They are often filled with unseen preparation. Just like something being assembled behind a closed door, the absence of visible movement does not mean inactivity. It simply means the process is not yet ready to be revealed. And when a person begins to accept that not everything needs to be seen immediately, their anxiety about waiting naturally begins to decrease. As patience grows, so does emotional resilience. A person becomes less reactive to uncertainty. They begin to handle unexpected changes with more stability. They no longer feel the need to constantly question every delay or interpret every silence. Instead, they begin to allow life to unfold without excessive internal resistance. And in that state, something very important happens. The mind becomes less crowded. The heart becomes less burdened. And even though the situation may still be unresolved, the internal experience of it becomes lighter. That lightness does not come from external change, but from internal acceptance of the process. Over time, patience transforms from something that feels like waiting into something that feels like growing. Because in reality, waiting is not empty. It is filled with quiet development that only becomes visible later. And when a person reaches that later stage, they often realize that the very delays they once struggled with were part of the path that led them to where they needed to be. And if you find value in reminders like this, subscribe to the channel for more reflections that bring peace to the heart and clarity to the mind.